طبعا يعني مسك الختام بهذا اليوم المميز جدا بهاي الجلسة اللي رح تحكي أكثر عن المناطق المقدسة بالقدس، وطبعا في علاقات ما بين العلاقات هاي الثقافية و يعني عفوا خربشت يمكن بالجلسة، لا مزبوطة. Okay. So sociocultural relations between Christians in Jerusalem. I hope بتمنى أن تكون يعني أكيد راح يكون ختامها مسك. بشرفني أني أقدم طبعا رئيسة الجلسة الدكتورة نهى خوري كنائب الرئيس للشؤون الأكاديمية في دار الكلمة الجامعية للفنون والثقافة. يعني ما بتكفيش دائما الكلمات أنه نقدم دكتورة نهى بشغفها لهذا المكان، بأنه الجيل القادم راح يكون الأمل، وهو الأمل أساسا، بأنه كل طالب وطالبة بهذا المكان عندهم إشي يعطوه جميل جدا لفلسطين. فبالتأكيد لما بنحكي عن القدس وبنحكي أنه يعني دكتورة نهى الشير لهذه لآخر جلسة، بنحكي أنه هاي الجماليات كلها مش راح توقف عند جدار، راح تخترق هذا الجدار وتروح للقدس اللي هي حلم كل فلسطيني وحلم كمان لكل شاب وشابة. يمكن ولا حد منهم شاف القدس بهاي الأعمار اللي بتدرس اليوم فنون وثقافة وجمالية. طبعا دكتورة نهى بدراساتها المتعددة بدأت بماجستير علوم سياسية، انطلقت لمواضيع أكثر تخصصا بالعصور الوسطى، لدراسات إسلامية بالعصور الوسطى، وصلت لدرجة الدكتوراه. وطبعا إحنا وهي الأم الحنون، هي من أعمدة هذا المكان، ولا يمكن تتخيل دار الكلمة الجامعية للفنون والثقافة من دون دكتورة نهى. كان لي الشرف أقدمك، وطبعا الدور لإلك دكتورة مع تنين من يعني كمان أهم الباحثين بمواضيعهم اليوم. شكرا كثير لأنه المناضلين الموجودين معنا لهلا. يعطيكم العافية.
Thank you, Angie. Thank you all for your stamina. And I'm sure we will have two presentations that are worth staying for. I will start with my colleague, Dr. Nظمي الجعبة. I will introduce him. We'll give him 15 to 20 minutes. Then we will stop. And then we will give my other colleague, because academia, this is how we talk, just so to get the name right, this is very important. Dr. George Tesouros, yes? And then he will present his paper, and then we will open for discussion. Yes? Okay. Dr. Nظمي الجعبة, born in Jerusalem in 1955, he is an associate professor of history and archaeology at Birzeit University. And at Birzeit, for those who don't know, it is in the north of Ramallah in Palestine. He was also the co-director of Ouraق, the Center for Architectural Conservation in Ramallah, between the years 92 and 2010. He also was the director of the Islamic Museum at Al-Haram al-Sharif in Jerusalem between 1980 till 1984. Dr. Ju'be's research melds or puts archaeology, history, politics, and architecture together. He completed his first degree in Middle Eastern Studies and Archaeology at Birzeit University, and I think now the program has been stopped, no? Somehow. And he received both his master's and PhD in Oriental Studies and Archaeology. He received a master's degree in Oriental Studies and Archaeology and his PhD in Oriental Studies from the University of Tübingen and in Germany. Dr. Ja'be is known as an expert on Jerusalem and Hebron in general, and the holy sites in particular. He has published several books and large numbers of articles on history, archaeology, politics, and architecture. And from our discussion, I discovered, well, not discovered, he is a grandfather of two. Yes? Please.
That's the only qualification that I have. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Noah, for the kind words. Thanks for the invitation. I know it's too late to tackle a very simple issue like holy sites. I'm sure that you are awake enough to think with me loudly about the issue that full of explosions, and an issue maybe will be one of the major obstacles of future solution in this country. Before I go with this problematic, I will begin with the easy question: what is a holy site? I have no definition. Nobody has a definition for holy site. I've tried to follow up in the literature of different cultures the definition of holy site. I found tens of definitions. None of them is good enough to be used in Jerusalem because it's a city in a conflict. So when holy sites are in the center of a conflict, I think the definition is totally different. I'm not going to propose a definition for a holy site. Previous speakers today already mentioned holy sites several times in their speeches, and I was not really aware what do they mean by that. What is a holy site? Who has the right to define a holy site? Are we capable in the future to reach a common definition for a holy site among Christians, among Christians Muslims, among Christians Jews, among Christian Muslim Jewish sites, Muslim Christian Jewish holy site? What is that? It's a complex. I will tell you some examples. A very beautiful Mamluk building overlooking the Aqsa Mosque, on the western wall of the Aqsa Mosque, which was a school in the Mamluk period, in the 14th century, called Al-Baladiyya, Al-Madrasa Al-Baladiyya, the Baladiyya school. It has a very beautiful mosque with very beautiful praying niche, mihrab, and now used as a house for Jerusalemite family. Is this a holy site? A yeshiva, theology school in the Jewish quarter, which used as a school for theology, like seminary. Is it a holy site? Can we list it as a holy site? What do we mean really by holy site? In my lists, which are annexes to my article, I've tried to list every site which could be claimed as a holy site. Well, without saying that it is a holy site, but could be claimed as a holy site. How can you classify the German Mary Church in the Jewish quarter, which is now in the Jewish quarter, which is an archaeological site? Is it a holy site, which is an abandoned site since, I don't know, 13th century, maybe collapsed, and the building arrived us without a roof, but it's a clear basilica of a Crusader period? Is it a holy site? Now, the definition can be in places like, I will say, in New Zealand or in Sweden, an easy task. Here it has a totally different meaning. Sometimes we mean, when we use the terminology holy site, we just mean contested or problematic sites. Because I don't think that the there is a problem among Palestinians and Israelis, Jews or Muslims or Christians, about a mosque in Beit Hanina, Shuman Mosque in Beit Hanina. Who cares what you call it? A holy site or a prayer site or, you know, I don't, it's called Masjid Beit Hanina or Masjid Shuman. So to minimize the question of the holy site, of the holy sites, maybe we have to go directly to the issue. The issue is sites with claims of other religions on the same site. This is true for Christian holy sites as well as for Muslim and Jewish holy sites. I would say the issue of holy site in Jerusalem can be digged up from Hadrian period. In the 2nd century AD, when he decided to build a Roman temple on the site which Christians or early Christians thought it is the site of the Holy Sepulchre. So he paved the site and erased it and built on the top of it a Jupiter temple. Others will say, no, the holy site issue began when Titus, the Roman Titus, decided to destroy the 2nd Jewish temple in Jerusalem. It could be, because in the 4th century onwards, in the Byzantine period, we saw a revival of biblical traditions. It is not true that it's in the 19th century. It is a revival of in the 19th century. But actually, in the Byzantine people, we could see that there is a clear tendencies among early Christians, especially we have a lot of Christian accounts of travelers who came to Palestine in that period, especially in the West. We have very little Oriental literature at that time, but mostly European travelers who really were digging up the Bible, even trying to localize a lot of holy sites or places mentioned in the Bible. So the idea of biblical tradition was very strong since the 4th century AD. The second stage in the issue of the holy sites began with the Crusaders. The conflict between the Latin Church and Oriental Church in the holy sites in the Crusader period. Well, unfortunately, we do not have much Oriental views about what happened in that period, where the Latin Church kicked out the local Christian communities from the major churches. Sometimes they allowed them to pray here and there, but mostly the control was totally in the hand of the Latin Church. Then we have the different interventions of the different Islamic regimes, which were balancing between their interests, which community is more important to them. We saw it in the Ayyubite period as well as in the Mamluk period, and then it became a major game in the Ottoman period, where you have the influential Armenian lobby inside Istanbul. We have the Greek Orthodox, the Georgian influence, etc. I don't want to go on through all of that. But then it was minimized. The whole issue of the holy sites minimized in the 19th century mainly to the Christian holy sites, which different churches claiming interest or control in several churches, which the word or the terminology status quo in Berlin Conference was accepted to understand this relationship between the different Christian communities in Jerusalem and Bethlehem only. Which the list, I think it's just 7 sites which are listed in the status quo agreement. The rest of the holy sites in Jerusalem, the rest of the Christian holy sites in Jerusalem, the rest of the Muslim holy sites in Jerusalem, the rest of the Jewish holy sites in Jerusalem were not in question. It was not part of any agreement. Later, the terminology status quo developed actually to describe the the frozen situation around so-called holy sites in Jerusalem. And we Jerusalemites use the terminology status quo to anything that was in place in the form of de facto existence after 1967. So any changes in the relationship between communities in the old city of Jerusalem, especially after 1967, we said this is a change in the status quo. So the status quo became as a form of umbrella organizing the relationship between the different religious communities in Jerusalem. So if the Israelis confiscated the key of the Mughrabi gate leading to the Haram al-Sharif from the plaza of the Wailing Wall, the Islamic Waqf reaction was, this is a violation of the status quo. So the terminology status quo, which was organizing pure Christian relationships, became a form of organizing the relationship among the communities, the different communities in Jerusalem. I will claim that, without going further in the very short paper, which is about 55 pages, I will say just a few sentences before I end up. Regardless to the, I will say the form of solution for Jerusalem, which we can together imagine a divided city or united city, open city for everybody, under two sovereignties, or divided a new city, open old city, divided new city, open holy basin. I can list at least 7, 8 options which are familiar to all of you for the future, for the solution of the future of Jerusalem. All of them cannot save us from a deep conflict over the holy sites. I think people sometimes aware of it, but they do not think deeply about this explosion in the future. Just to quote the Camp David negotiations between the Palestinians and Israelis, where President Clinton pushed Arafat to recognize the attachment of the Jewish people to the Aqsa Mosque, to the Temple Mount. So Arafat said, yes, I will do it, but after the king of Jordan, the king of Morocco, and the king of Saudi Arabia, get me the agreement of all of these 3 kings, and I will be number 4. So Clinton said, oh, that's easy task. This is so easy, I will call them immediately. And he sat with his team, and he began to call the kings, the mentioned kings. All of them said, no way. You are asking us to sign the certification of our assassination. I'm saying this story because it reflects the level of sensitivity of the holy sites in the future. Now, I will tell you that even with the question, I hope tomorrow my colleague Isa Qassisiya will tackle the issue with the Vatican in deeply, and the agreement with the Vatican, which was a little bit highlighted by Dr. Mitri, but it has a lot of other explosions for the Christian communities as well as for the Muslim community in Jerusalem, without mentioning the Jewish interest in the city. Finally, looking at the holy sites, we are also tackling the narratives. It's not only the holiness of the site, but we have different contested narratives about each holy site. What is considered by the Muslims, the Aqsa Mosque, is considered by the Jews the Temple Mount, with all of its history in their beliefs, which is a very you cannot ignore it at all. The question, how then to solve it? the different models that were presented to solve the issue were not acceptable for either side. Therefore, I think that we need to invest more time and more deep digging in the issue of the holy sites, because maybe this is the future. Either we will live in this country in peace in the future, or the peace will never reach us. I will stop here, but maybe in the questions I can answer some. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. Okay, now we move to the next presentation by Dr. George Tsoros, and it's entitled "The Boundaries and Borders: Sociocultural Relations Between Christians in Jerusalem." Dr. Tsoros is a social anthropologist and an associate fellow at the Center of Ethnographic Studies in the University of Kent in the UK. His research, funded by the British Academy, involves the investigation of the sociocultural relationship between the different Christian communities of Jerusalem, focusing upon the Greek, Rum, Orthodox community. And I just found out it was easy for him to get there because he was born in Athens, linguistically, so access.
Not very easy, but...
Well, it's, I mean, you know, at least one of the better ones. You are a Rumi also, no? Through conducting long-term ethnographic work in Jerusalem's Old City, Dr. George explored the relationships that are forged between resident clergy as well as between the local Christians within the context of everyday life in a major shrine of Christianity, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. His research interests also include Christian-Muslim relations and the impact of pilgrimage in shared sacred spaces in Israel, Palestine, and Egypt. The shared 7, I don't know, shared, contested sacred places. Please.
I will be using some nice photographs to keep your interest alive. I know it has been a long day for all of us, so thank you for being here. My name is George Tsoros, and I'm a social anthropologist. I did fieldwork in Jerusalem for almost 2 years, and I studied the relations between the different Christian communities. And using my Greek Orthodox background, I had access in the Greek Orthodox community, and through them, I tried to analyze relations. Let me just get my water. Before I start, I would like to thank Mitri Raheb and Professor Reverend Dr. Mitri Raheb and Rania for the kind invitation. It's been very nice to be here. And thank you all for your interest in this difficult time. So, I've studied anthropology in the UK, and I specialize in anthropology of religion and anthropology of Christianity in particular. So just to give you a little bit of the anthropological context of this research that I will be talking about. In anthropology, the main question is how do we understand similarities and differences in humans. So how we are similar and yet so different. That is the question that lies in the heart of the anthropological study. How can we all be the same and yet so different? In my case, the question is how Christians in Jerusalem are very different, but at the same time, they're Christians. They do come from diverse traditions, but they share the same Christian beliefs. So they understand things differently and they do things differently. So as an anthropologist, then I'm obliged to move beyond the belief of people, what they say they believe, and see what they do. Because as you probably know, people say one thing, but they do something completely different. So it is necessary to look at what people do and what they say they do, sometimes while they are in the process of doing it. So in my research, I'm not only focusing on the Christian belief, I look at the practices, as I said, what people do. And I would like to mention a very interesting work by an anthropologist called Tanya Lehrman. She has been working with evangelical Christians in the US. And she made a very nice distinction between belief and faith. She said that belief, it's an easy thing. Everyone can have a belief about something. But faith is the hard thing because it actually involves doing something about your belief. You have to follow up on your belief. And it often involves practices, for example, that involve physical activity, talking, singing, dancing, touching, kissing, or prostrating. And these practices also involve religious objects that people use. And this can be a wide range of objects, including books, icons, statues. So we have sounds and colors and smells. So I do focus on these practices because when I started, I thought that perhaps they can tell us something about how people form relationships with other Christians through using different objects, through different material practices. And I focused on the Church of the Holy Sepulchre because it provided a unique opportunity. As very different Christians, they all cohabit the confined space. I'm sure you know the Greek Orthodox, called locally Greeks, Roman Catholics called Latins, and the Armenian Orthodox called Armenians, the three major communities of the Church, and the three smaller communities, the Coptic, Ethiopian, and Syriac Orthodox churches. So I was in the church for 17 months, conducting what we call in anthropology participant observation. And I tried to understand social relations between different Christians and see what sort of boundaries and borders appear between them. I use boundaries and borders as two distinct analytical categories in my research. Boundaries refers to the conceptual distinctions made between objects, people, and practices, as well as time and space. However, boundaries also have territorial manifestations, that is, physical borders that mark space in the Church of the Anastasis. So in the Church, diverse Christian faiths come into contact via their custodian groups in various ways. Syriac Orthodox priests can be seen processing to their chapel next to Brazilian Catholic pilgrims waiting to get into Jesus' tomb. Russian pilgrims frantically wrap the marbles of the stone of unction with clothes to take home to sick relatives, while groups of Franciscan monks and pilgrims from Italy, France, or Ghana process from one shrine to another, mingling with Ethiopian women dressed in cotton crepe prayer shawls. Greek monks reluctantly have to make room for Armenian deacons arriving at the edicule to clean their oil lamps. The church is abuzz with people from all over the world who can be at once found mingling, attending various types of services, and processing around shrines. Furthermore, people on site stress that the church is a living place of worship inhabited by clerics and monks, not a museum with relics preserved for the curiosity of tourists. So let us see how boundaries and borders are shaped and maintained and probably crossed among Jerusalem's Orthodox Christians. Denominational boundaries and spatial borders are firmly maintained within the church, and relations can often become tense among the custodians. In fact, the various Christian communities are famous for the petty squabbling at the Anastasis Church. Stories of Greek Orthodox monks feuding with Armenian clerics over the cleaning of such and such window ledge in the church often appear in the news. Coexistence, probably the Nativity as well. Coexistence in the church is not always peaceful, and disputes happen frequently, damaging relations between the different Christian custodians. Yet, there are also positive examples of collaboration that doesn't often make it to the news, as in the case of the common visit of Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew and Pope Francis. The communities worked together for the reception of these two leaders. Another instance was the restoration of the edicule as it was deemed necessary to be repaired. Many aspects of the relations between the anastasis custodians, as it was previously mentioned by other speakers, and I'm sure you all know, is determined by the current set of arrangements, the status quo legislation of the holy places, which regulates the functioning of the holy places in Israel and Palestine. These agreements grew out of long conflicts and negotiation between the communities, were codified in the 19th century by the Ottoman authorities, and have since been internationally recognized as the legislative agreements that grant the various religious communities shared rights, demarcate which areas are under whose control, and establish time schedules for allocation of shared shrines. Now, some aspects of history, but also theology, are important to understand how the custodians in the church see themselves and the ways they relate to others. Theology in particular is useful for understanding boundaries among Christians in Jerusalem. The different churches are separated by theology, that is to say, the communities of the church subscribe to different theologies. And theology here refers to the different theological discourses that have been systematically cultivated over time by the leaders, saints, and theologians of the various churches. The Orthodox, for example, regard their church as the church of the seven councils, referring to the legally convened assemblies of ecclesiastical dignitaries and theologians that regulate matters of doctrine and other issues. So theological distinctions are important between the communities because each theological tradition produces canonical boundaries for the entire body of believers, and thus it creates membership. So as I said, I tried to understand social relations in the church through having access in the Greek Orthodox community. That's me here, field working. Paying the bills. So the community is also called Room Orthodox, which probably you know it's a term used in Jerusalem and the Arab world when referring to Greek Orthodox Christians. The term came into existence following the fall of Byzantine Constantinople to the Ottoman Empire in 1453, when Sultan Mehmed II instituted for administrative purposes the Room Millet. This was the religious confessional community which included all Eastern Roman Christians, also known as Byzantines, and all Orthodox Greeks, Bulgarians, Albanians, Serbs, as well as Georgians and Arab Christians were considered part of the same millet in spite of differences in ethnicity and language. And the Patriarch became, out of necessity to speak with the Ottoman authorities, the literal representative of the Room Millet, and as well as all Christians in the Holy Land. Now, Orthodox Christians in Jerusalem, they understand themselves to be the inheritors of the first Christian church, and that's probably to a certain extent true for Christians of other denominations. The first Christian church was established by Jesus himself and his disciples, and going back as far as the events of crucifixion and resurrection. The event of Pentecost, the outpouring of the Holy Spirit, is treated by the Orthodox community as the beginning of the Christian church, and James the Just is treated as being the first leader of the newly formed church, and each Greek Orthodox Patriarch sees himself as being James' legitimate successor. Furthermore, the Greek custodians, they see themselves as the successors of Spudei. Spudei was erudite monks, created in 5th century by Helena and Constantine, and they were dedicated to the care of shrines and performing ongoing worship and promoting organized spiritual life. So the members of this clergy in the church, they participate in multiple imagined worlds. This is a multiple participation. They are part of a body of believers, a specific church. They are citizens of a nation, as well as members of a monastic order. The Orthodox Church in Jerusalem, for example, is not only a local church, but is linked with an imagined entity and part of the wider body of believers who form the global Orthodox Church. The other Christian churches in the Anastasis, while representing different structures internally, each can be seen in relation to their respective imagined churches stretching beyond Jerusalem. Theology separates Christian churches. However, people in the Anastasis are not only separated by theology. Boundaries are also drawn along the lines of ethnicity, as in the case, for example, of the Greek and Armenian brotherhoods. Each of these custodian groups consists of exclusively Greek or Armenian clergy, and for this reason they are called Greeks and Armenians, identified in ethnic, if not national terms. So ethnic differences play an equally important role in shaping boundaries between the custodians in the church. Now, disputes occur around the rights of usage and ownership of shrines, and central to these disputes are material practices of territorialization of particular shrines by the custodians in the church. Within Orthodox practice, qualities of sight and touch towards sacred objects emerge. Various objects are used in the course of Orthodox services. However, in shared shrines in the church, such as in the edicule, the little chapel enclosing Jesus' tomb, the Greek custodian's employment of objects facilitates borders, maintenance of borders between the communities that share the shrine. For example, objects such as candles are used as visible signs to demarcate borders with the other communities. And I argue that it's important to consider the materiality of things employed as objects that are used to promote border lines. For example, this particular candle is there while the Greeks are using the edicule, and the Armenians who follow during the night, they will not proceed unless that particular candle is removed from the area. Furthermore, the space of the tomb of Jesus, a shared area in the church, is understood as being extremely intimate and personal place for a lot of custodians. Several people told me that the tomb is a special place that affects them because of the emotions it evokes during ritual practice. Due to this, the tomb, as an affective space, has been a determining factor for some people to enroll in this monastic community and come to Jerusalem. Following the belief that Jesus was raised from the dead at this site, informants regularly referred to his tomb as being the location where death was defeated. Several custodians affirmed his tomb as being the place of resurrection, and Jesus' empty sarcophagus is seen as being the location of the victory of life over death. Some of them, reflecting on their original pilgrimage to Jerusalem and the church, they said that they experienced an acute sense of, as they approached the edicule, as approaching Christ himself. A feeling unlike any other before, they would say. Nonetheless, for many Orthodox people venerating the tomb of Jesus, it evoked an increased sense of belonging to the Orthodox Church, but that feeling was replaced by unease through confrontation with religious things of other Christianities, visible in shrines surrounding the edicule. This included the Armenian liturgical artifacts in the Armenian Brotherhood's Kiborium on the right, which is located on the left side of the rotunda, as well as both the Catholic chapels on the right side of the church, and of course, the organ. Some of the Greeks hated the organs with passion, actually. So, although the status quo defines borders between the communities by detailing the rights of usage and ownership for each community, affect, ritualistic related affect, is also a source of explanation of the formation of an alternative border layout, which relates to objects, as some of them are being avoided and one approached with greater apprehension than others. So, although disputes between the custodian groups cohabiting the site are frequent, I argue that these disputes are not indices of wider power struggles between international churches. In other words, I think disputes in the anastasis should be seen as a family argument rather than disputes between churches. Furthermore, the struggle in the church does not reflect the dynamic of relations between the local Palestinian Christians, who nonetheless form an integral part of Jerusalem's Christianity. Local Palestinian Christians remain indifferent to the occasional custodian clerics' disputes in the church, and they disregard denominational boundaries. I witnessed no particular interest from Palestinian Orthodox informants in the clerics' intracommunal struggle for control, other than condemning the struggle and affirming that fights are for the priests, not for us. I recall a conversation with one of my neighbors in the old city, Maria, a Palestinian Catholic woman from an Orthodox background. I'll do my best. I now have half a minute, yeah? So I recall a conversation, I'm just going to finish now, yeah. I recall a conversation with one of my neighbors in the old city, Maria, a Palestinian Catholic woman from an Orthodox background, whereby we talked about the custodians' fights in the anastasis. So although Maria seemed indifferent to the disputes between clerics, she nevertheless exclaimed with somewhat mischievous look on her face that she prefers the Catholics, the powerful ones. By living in the old city in the months that followed, I was able to fully understand Maria's statement, which related to her experiences with the community services provided by Jerusalem's Catholic Church, that Maria and her family enjoyed. This included housing accommodation, medical care, and services for the children, such as nurseries, schools, and activities provided by the Palestinian Catholic Scout Association. The role of the Catholic Church is a distinctive one, through which, by allowing permeability in the Church's denominational boundaries and offering a plethora of services for free, it has gradually attracted Christians from other denominations who, over time, may abandon their familial ties and join the Catholic Church and community. And I argue that this movement has a reciprocal character which can be situated within the realm of power relations and exchange. Maria prefers the powerful Catholics since, through them, she is able to better her position on a practical level as a Christian Palestinian living amongst the Palestinian Muslim and Israeli Jewish majority. So Maria's decision to follow the powerful ones, herself seen as a powerless Palestinian Christian, should be contextualized within the local Palestinians' unfortunate situation as a trapped minority, politically weak and economically marginal group at the political and economic mercy of a regime that they never chose. So Christians in Jerusalem expressed their concern about the future. They frequently talked about discriminatory policies and the attitudes of people in the Israeli public services, who treated them as less than equal Israeli citizens. People mentioned specifically the religious ultra-Orthodox Jews, Haredim, who openly expressed hatred towards Christians by spitting on them or through price tag attacks. The common theme was that people felt unwelcomed in Jerusalem, a city which, in their view, was becoming increasingly a place for Jews only. Now, the state I mean, some scholars working in communities in the Middle East, they have said about the state of Israel that it has been described as a multi-ethnic and yet deeply divided society. And the state's secular approach has created more problems than solutions. So the state of Israel incorporates democratic features in its system of governance, promoting Israel's political system as the only democracy in the Middle East. And yet critical scholars have argued that because of Israel's state apparatus, and because this apparatus is appropriated by a dominant Jewish group, Israel is not actually a democracy, but rather an ethnocracy. As such, there is a specific tension created by the state's commitment to secular-oriented democracy and equality on one hand, and on the other hand, the desire to maintain the specific ethno-religious character of the only Jewish state in the world. This tension is manifested in the treatment of Palestinian minority. And Israel's political secularism asserts that the country extends religious freedoms to all inhabitants. However, following the creation of the State of Israel, the government decided to treat its Arab citizens as members of a religious minority rather than as an ethnic minority in a secular state. The decision was, as some of the previous speakers mentioned, the decision was based on the existing social and legal structures regarding religious minorities previously laid out by the British Mandate authorities of Palestine that saw Palestinian Christians as part of the wider Arab problem, the latter being Palestinian involvement in political activism. And I'm now coming to a conclusion. Maria's choice should seem that it's an effort to better her marginalized position. And I argue that the view of Palestinian Christians as a religious minority has in many ways been internalized by Palestinian Christians themselves, who in turn, they project a single Christian identity across borders and divides. So downplaying their denominational affiliation was a striking feature among my informants. The accounts of local Christians whose narratives and practices I recorded can be summarized in a frequently repeated phrase: here in Jerusalem, we are all one. في القدس إحنا كلنا واحد. However, the local Palestinians' engagement in practices drawn from across the spectrum of Christianity also invites a discussion on approved practice. So, for example, people would use items that they are associated with another Christian tradition. As, for example, one of my informants, Mariam, an unmarried Room Orthodox lady of Palestinian origins. I frequently visited her shop, and she would treat items of different Christian denominations as being all the same. And all of these pilgrims, they would say, she would say that I don't understand why pilgrims ask me if I'm Orthodox or Catholic, because Virgin Mary and Christ is one, is the same for all, isn't it? So people would use objects from diverse Christian backgrounds, such as the icons or also the rosarios. They would use this interchangeably without seeing any difference. So I tried to paint a comprehensive picture of boundaries and borders as shown in my research. And I'm really sorry for going over, and I will be happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Okay. I'm so glad it didn't happen here where the camera would have caught it. I hope it did. You didn't. You turned the camera this way? Okay. Thank you. Thank you for it took 30 minutes, by the way, not 23. Yeah? Thank you, everybody, for staying for this time. And let us have 3 questions. And if there is more, we will start with Albert, Victoria, and Dr. Abdallah. Yeah.
These were exceptionally inspiring presentations, both of them. But I want to tell George that it is not one, it's many. The way I try to explain or justify the unjustifiable. Jerusalem is a mother that has too many children and that are at close range. So it's very natural for children to heckle each other, to push each other to be closer to the mother. You know, but at the end of the day, they are brothers and sisters, and everyone has his or her story. And I think you have done a beautiful work in showing this. But when I saw several pictures of the edicule, and I have visitors, so my line is that, what are these people queuing for? The tomb is empty, so they are looking for something which is this, and this is where I avoid the edicule, you know. But at the same time, another joke I make. I have been talking too much in order to break a little bit the monotony at the end of the day. When we come to the center of the universe, you know, in the Catholicon, I tell them this is the center of the universe. And I bet you every Middle Eastern people feel that they are the center. Don't argue with them. Neither the Greeks, nor the Italians, nor Arab. But then I add, especially if we have Americans, but don't worry, the USA is in the middle of Jerusalem. And I mean it literally, not symbolically or politically. You know, if you take the word Jerusalem, you remove J-E-R-L-E-M, you have the USA. So in order to break the monotony again. But thanks for these brilliant presentations.
Thank you for your presentations. My question is actually to both of you who've presented. What role, and of course, George, with your last presentation, it is your presentation that makes me ask this question. What role does gender play in the creation of holy sites?
At the end, okay.
Oh, thank you. Shukran. Professor Tsaros, my question is, do you think that the quarrels and rose between two or three denominations, between the priests of two or three denominations, is emanated from their beliefs, their religious beliefs, or for self-interests or other interests? Thank you.
Okay. Well, I will address the gender question. Religion is a creation of men.
Oh, Lord.
Do you know anybody who claimed others?
Yeah, me.
In all societies, 3,000, 4,000 women were dominating.
Okay, but مظبوط بس بالديانات التوحيدية ديانات رجولية ذكورية 100%. I'm sorry, in the monotheistic religions, it's just a creation of men. I believe that in the atheist world, before believing in one God, women were playing a major role. Goddess, they were there. But when we got Abraham and the Abrahamic traditions, I think men became the dominant element until today, regardless which minor role do women play in the religion today. But I still think that the religion is still a monopoly of men.
But goddesses are not women, they are
Yes,
feminine, but not women.
Yes, but this is before the Abrahamic traditions.
Oh, they think so.
Okay, خلاص.
Thank you for your question. That's a really important question. And I often asked my informers myself, you know, I said this is a male-dominated institution, practice. What is the role of women? So they pointed me to texts, basically. most of the times. But they also pointed me to practices that they were active in early Christianity, but they sort of have been abandoned now lately, some centuries. For example, they said about female diaconess. They found some graves in St. George Hosiva Monastery with female names, and basically they argue that they used to serve in the church, but this, for some reason, this practice was abandoned. But I followed that information, and I found online that there's actually discussion in the Greek Orthodox Church whether, that should be revived in a way. And then they pointed out the role of Mary, of being the mother of God, and all of that. Oh, I'm sure you know. But it's an interesting question, and it always bounces back.
Okay, let's open for another three.
Thank you for these great presentations. I was really interested in your idea about holy site as a contested site, because I think this is an interesting concept. And then connecting it to the idea of borders and boundaries, where it is somehow the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is a contested site somehow, but they were able to manage that contestedness through borders and boundaries. My question is, do you think for the holy sites in Jerusalem there is any hope for creating a system where this contestedness can be managed somehow? You said there are maybe 7-8 models how to do that, but it would be good to hear from you maybe 1 or 2 models that you think might work.
Other questions? There's one question here.
This is a question to Dr. Nظمي. It's also related to something that Dr. Mitri touched base on with the Zionist and Zionist Christian views. We seem to take the Zionist narrative as an uncontested historical fact. Are there committees within the PLO or the Muslim Higher Council that examine the Zionist claims regarding the temple and why the temple should be in that specific spot where the Al-Aqsa Mosque is or where the Dome of the Rock is, and to examine what the temple really means for the Jews today? Because the temple used to be the house of God. David said, I'm living in a castle and God lives in a tent, so I want to build a temple for God. And so today, where is God? Where is the covenant? Where are the tablets of the commandments? Is this narrative being contested by anybody? Thank you.
Any other? Okay, Javier.
Thank you. George, thanks for your presentation. I have a very small comment and one question for you. I'm one of those former Orthodox people. I did not leave the Orthodox Church because I didn't have services. I never asked a church for a service. I left it because I didn't want to live under a second occupation. And that's how I would feel with the Greek Orthodox Patriarchate. Now, in terms of the question, when you talk about your analysis when it comes from this distinction between Israel trying to be a secular state on one side and on the other side being religious or the only Jewish state as you referred, you really think that Israel ever tried to be a secular state, ever dealt with Palestinians as a secular state from the very beginning when they recognized themselves as a state of the Jewish people, not the state of its citizens? Thank you.
I will begin with your question, sir. In the Islamic tradition, until the 20th century, there was no problem with the Temple of Solomon, even with the Herodian temple. The later denial literature, which arose after the Zionist movement, was a political denial, not historical denial. We have to differentiate between historical denial, because you know the Jewish tradition is very well anchored in the Islamic tradition, either in the official religion or in the popular religion. You know, it's even, you know, kings are prophets. Kings of the Bible became prophets in Islam. So Islam even considered itself as a continuity of Judaism and Christianity. Therefore, you can say that the traditional Islamic position was adaptation of the Jewish traditions and not denying the Jewish traditions. Now, we have to differentiate between political claim and historical narrative. I remember that I was with a very prominent German academicians in a visit of the Aqsa Mosque. And one of them told me in a sentence, he mentioned the Temple Mount. I said, why you call it Temple Mount? It is the Aqsa Mosque. He said, but it once before 2,000 years, it was a Temple Mount. I said, okay, let us look on the Holy Sepulchral Church. Do you see Jupiter Temple? He said, no, it is the Holy Sepulchral Church. I said, but before less than 2,000 years, it was Jupiter Temple. Why the name there was deleted totally, and here you want to keep it? So I do not argue whether there was a temple or not. I think this is nonsense argumentation. It has no meaning at all, regardless whether there was a temple or not, destroyed before 2,000 years. I do not demand the Cordoba Mosque to become a mosque again. You know, why should we accept this argumentation just concerning this side? Why to reverse, to which period shall we reverse history? Okay, I accept, if you want to reverse history, I accept this basic argument. Let us reverse it 70 years ago. Let us reverse Palestine to 70 years ago. That means let us allow all the refugees to come back. The Israeli will say, no, no, God, I do not accept that. So do you want me to accept to reverse history 2,000 years and you reject reversing history 70 years? Again, this is a dialogue of power. It has nothing to do with history and historicity. The other question is related to contested. Sometimes I go to easy questions in order to solve more complicated questions. I was telling some friends today that I have a lovely experience in the last 3 years following and being part of the restoration project of the Nativity Church. Less contested. The historical rights are clear. The status quo agreement about it is clear. But it was hell for me in the last 3 years talking to the 3 churches. You know, which cable could be going below the ground, which is not part of my historical right, I will not use it. And we are talking about the harmony that you presented. They are the same beliefs, the same Christianity, etc. So you can imagine if one of the rights inside the Nativity Church is a Muslim or Jewish rights, you know. I'm happy that the Muslims stopped praying inside the church. You know, in the Middle Ages, Muslim travelers, especially Sufis, were arriving to the Nativity and going inside the church, and they prayed for a few minutes and getting out without rights. I'm happy that they stopped doing it. Otherwise, we'll have additional church inside the 4 churches instead of 3. Now, the number of really, between 2 brackets, contested site is not much. I can list them very quickly. In Jerusalem, I'm just disregarding a little bit Rachel Tomb, disregarding the Abraham Mosque in El Khalil, but in Jerusalem, what we are talking about? You know, we are talking about the Haram al-Sharif, the Aqsa Mosque. This is the issue. This is the mother of all issues. Even the terminology used between Israel and the Vatican, they said holy places, but which holy places? You know, it's not mentioned which holy places. Does it mean the Christian holy places? Does it mean every holy place in Jerusalem? And then we go back to the definition of the terminology. But there is only one major contested holy site, if you want, with two different narratives. I am not disregarding. No, it's just one. The other are very easy sites, you know, like the David tomb or like the Nabi Samuel. You know, they are easy issues, easy cake, you know, and there are models how to solve them. But the Aqsa Mosque issue, we know that it was easier 20, 30 years ago to solve the problem of the Aqsa Mosque. But when at least 30 officially registered Israeli organizations, officially registered in the Israeli Ministry of Interior, with the aim of establishing, officially declared, establishing the third temple on the ruins of the Aqsa Mosque. 30 organizations, and they are not far away from the decision makers in Israel. They are part of the political elite and establishment today ruling over Israel. So our conflict on the holy site, on the Haram al-Sharif, is more not only religious but absolutely national, part of the conflict. My advice is to postpone the issue of the holy sites after the national conflict is over. We cannot solve the issue of the Haram al-Sharif, temple, mount, dash, whatever, before solving the national conflict over Jerusalem. If we reach that level, it will be not easy, but easier to tackle the issue of the holy site. But so long the national conflict is not over, the holy site will become a print point. You all remember the last uprising, if you want to call it, concerning the checkpoint or the metal detectors in the Aqsa Mosque. I never saw Palestinians, except in Gaza Strip, gathering around an issue without any kind of organization, just spontaneously coming and in a very hot days of the summer of 1917 and sitting on the boiling asphalt of Jerusalem in the midday under the sun without saying any word, just sitting. That was amazing. Then I began to understand that the conflict over the holy sites is much, much deeper than I thought, and it will evoke a lot of tension in the future.
Your question about whether the Greek Orthodox act driven by their religious belief or of self-interest. Well, I do think that, well, you know, in every institution you have those who are sincerely acting out of faith, or some others that join, you know, this is in the human nature. But I think a lot of the practices the Greeks follow, they are interpreted in many ways because there's a certain understanding of protecting the oldest Christian institution in the Holy Land. And once someone grasps how they see the Christian presence that goes back to 2,000 years, once someone grasps how they understand their presence, then a lot of other issues can fit into place, i.e., land transactions, services, and all of that. So it is a specific view of how, you know, their presence has been here for so many years and how to protect that.
Why Catholics and Protestants do not participate in such rites?
Sorry, I didn't understand?
Catholic priests and Protestant priests do not participate. Why? They never quarrel with such issues. Such issues.
You mean they not participate in what issues?
In issues of border in the churches and so on.
Yeah, they do. They do have conflicts and yeah.
Okay.
And yes, there is, as far as I understand, I'm not a political scientist, but as far as I understand, Israel is using the political international law which is available to demonstrate that they've created a constitution which is democratic. But as I said, there's a specific tension because they don't really stick to that, international law and certain practices in protecting minorities, etc. And this is manifested in how they treat minorities. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And good evening. No, good night. And good night. Yeah, it's 7 o'clock. It's night outside. Yeah, and hopefully all of you will have a good evening. And tomorrow morning there's another session starting at 9 o'clock. Yes?
Well, thank you very much for this session. I think the questions wouldn't have ended. And thank you so much for those who have stayed with us until now. Tomorrow is not to be missed. I mean, if you just please take a copy, another copy maybe of the program and just see the titles, at least of the papers, some refreshing information, music, and then we go into discourses and then Hashemite and then international laws and then I can't really mention the names in the last session, but inshallah tomorrow will be really a very, very interesting day not to be missed.